YouTube, what's up? Hey, France is in lockdown again. So yeah, I had to cancel the photo shoots I had planned, but it's okay, you just need to adapt. You know the drill, when you can't do a photo shoot, well, you just do a good inspiration shoot, just to inject some crazy images directly into our retinas and make us better photographers when we will be able to go out to take photos. Today, you know what, it's going to be special. Storytime, the first time I thought about making a YouTube channel, I didn't want to make it about photography, but about cinema. You know, I'm also a director and I love cinema. And frankly, I had great ideas for this channel. But above all, cinema combines everything I love, visual art used to tell a story. Through an animated medium, yes, but with the same basic rules as photography. I could have made a video like 5 or 10 movies to study to level up your photography, but honestly, I want to give you more than 10, so let's think differently and talk about a rather unknown job, that of cinematographer, also known as DOP, the director of photography. Because we often talk about the director, but in fact he is more like a conductor who coordinates all the different trades that will create the movie according to his vision. The DP is the one who is in charge of the visual component of the film, of its global aesthetics, of its light. Well, he will direct with the lighting director, the gaffer. He is the one who generally makes the choice of the composition, the focal length, the cameras to use to obtain the desired look. So I'm going to introduce you to 5 great cinematographers in order to give you a long list of movies to look into that you'll be able to binge right if, like us, you're stuck at home. Let's clarify, I'm not talking about my favorite movies or even necessarily masterpieces, even if it's the case for many of them, but just visually very strong movies. The goal of the exercise is that you look at these films and analyze the aesthetics, how each detail of each frame leads to tell something, in order to learn from the greats and to apply that in your photo work. Inspiration is everywhere. Maybe you already know the name of the first one. It's one of the few DP a little bit famous, especially for its many nominations for the Oscars, Richard Dickens. Our friend Richard was born in Devon, England, where he quickly became passionate about photography. True story, as a teenager, he was rejected from the National Film School because they thought his photos were not filmic enough. 15 nominations for the Oscar, guys. Chill. After several tries, he will finally be accepted and he will meet Michael Radford, who will be at the origin of his career. For several years, he will mostly directed documentaries to start in the industry, and it's Michael who will ask him to join him on a first feature film after he was impressed by Richard's work on the miniseries Walcott. But it's their second collaboration that will reveal Dickens with the film 1984, the adaptation of the George Orwell novel, and show his talent for creating color palettes to serve an atmosphere, to tell a story. To do this, he will bring back an old technique called the bleach bypass. When you develop a film, photo or video, from negative to positive, you have a processing step called bleaching. If you remove this step, the silver in the chemistry is not removed from the emulsion, and it will give this metallic aspect to the rendering. We will have a particular grain, but especially a desaturation in the black tones and a strong contrast. In fact, we will have the feeling of a black and white image on which we will have faded merge a colored image on top.
Here he comes.
It's a technique that we will be used again and again after that, for example in Seven.
What's in the fucking box?
Or Saving Private Ryan. Dickens' strength is not in trying to create a Dickens style, but rather in using his talent to create visuals, composition, and colors that serve the story. His talent is to adapt and explore something new each time. I recommend films like The Shawshank Redemption, for which he received his first Oscar nomination, or Dead Man Walking, which have the common point of being really simple aesthetically, but perfectly adapted to the story told. I also love the photography of The Village by Night Shyamalan, even if the film is often criticized. But one of my favorites remains The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. A visually extraordinary movie, a perfect color palette, and I would add a magnificent soundtrack. I want to see this movie again. If you're a minimalist photographer, you absolutely must study Fargo. Extraordinary, its work of composition and management of negative spaces, empty spaces, how its uncluttered environments become a central element of the storytelling and consistently limit the characters. It's also one of his many collaborations with the Coen brothers, among them The Big Lebowski.
I am not Mr. Lebowski. You're Mr. Lebowski. I'm the dude.
Or No Country for Old Men. Since we are talking about directors with whom he made his greatest collaborations, I'm gonna mention Sam Mendes with Jared, very powerful movie, and then there is Jake Gyllenhaal in it, so it's necessarily a good one. Revolutionary Road, Skyfall, one of the best James Bond of the franchise, and finally 1917, which has been talked about a lot recently for its huge second shot. And above all, a second Oscar for Richard, Suck It, National Film School. But I would really remember this collabs with one of my favorite directors, Denis Villeneuve, for Sicario and its violent and oppressive visual universe, and at the opposite extreme of the color spectrum, with its neon and saturated colors, its extraordinary photography, Blade Runner 2049. Really a fantastic work in the smallest details. Too many movies to recommend, and we've barely started. Emmanuel Lubezki is a Mexican cinematographer, and yes, he worked with very famous directors like Tim Burton, Mike Nichols, the Coen brothers. And you know what? I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm going to focus on his collaboration with only 3 directors, and we're going to start with his lifelong friend Alfonso Cuarón, whom he also met when he was a teenager in film school. Proof that it's important to keep your childhood friends. They have a big filmography together, A Little Princess, Y Tu Mamá También, but the 2 we will pick today is first Children of Men, a visual punch in the eyes. So yes, a post-collapsology movie at this time, yeah, I know. Obviously we will focus on the photography with this dull color, very raw feeling. But this movie is really to be studied, also for its technically and the inventiveness of its machinery. Lubezki is really going to start working on his mastery of long sequence shots, or rather his mastery of perfect transitions to create full sequence shots. The second film is Gravity, no matter what criticism one may have of it. Oh, there's no storyline! No, of course not. Nor is there any intelligence in what you say, but that's another debate. We can't take away that it pushes the technical progress and offers a real visual experience. And since we're talking about experience, let's talk about the 2 masterpieces he made with Alejandro González Iñárritu. First, Birdman, for his vision of the theater, of show business, and how he uses light to transcribe this universe. And then its rhythm, its construction, its moving and touching characters.
You're doing this because you're scared to death, like the rest of us, that you don't matter. And you know what? You're right. You don't!
You have to see this movie if you haven't already, for real. But you're going to tell me, hey, I'm a landscape photographer. Analyze in depth every second, every frame of The Revenant. The Revenant is the quintessence of Emmanuel Lubezki's talent. The natural light that he masters completely, his choreography of movement of course, but especially his love for wide-angle lenses. The film is shot almost entirely between 12 and 21mm on an Alexa 65, a camera that takes its name from its sensor with a very particular format, extremely stretched, which will allow to include the character in the frame, but also to extend the environment around him. The landscape is so present that it becomes the main character of the film. This visual atmosphere, this wide-angle passion, is at its best in his work with one of the directors who inspired me the most, Terrence Malick. How to define my relationship with Terrence Malick? He's one of the artists I admire the most in the world and whose works I don't like. The movies he produces are visual gems, orgasm for the eye. Every frame is perfect, but really, the editing is perfect, and yet it's so boring. I know, it's a genre, they are very contemplative movies, but I'm never invested in his way of telling stories. I get bored, so I just look at the images and think, damn, it's beautiful, but it's a personal opinion. If you happen to like it, and even if you don't, well, I'm the proof that you can still watch his movies and appreciate the aesthetics. Tell yourself anyway that as a photographer, you are obliged to watch Terrence Malick's films. Maybe what I like so much about him, in the end, is Lubezki's contribution. This mastery of wide angles, which is appropriate for the landscape, he applies it here to the portrait, to bring us closer to the humans on the screen. We come out necessarily overwhelmed by the visual experience that is the Tree of Life, when it represents the grandiose, as when it makes us penetrate the intimacy of the various protagonists. The characters in To the Wonder are live, are present. We feel each of their emotions. Look at a film like Song to Song. With a close-up at 50mm or 85, we will be closer to them, according to our human eye vision. Here, we have a vision that goes beyond. We are not only close, the distortion gives us the feeling of entering their intimacy. This is something that has been made possible only quite recently with the improvement of optics. A few years ago, the deformation below 18mm was really too distorting for human faces. Okay, Christopher Doyle is an adventurer. At 18, he leaves his native Australia on a cargo ship to travel the world. He will do many different jobs in India and Europe before crossing Asia, where he will become a photographer and then move to the cinema industry. You can familiarize yourself with his work through films like Paranoid Park or Hero, one of the first Chinese blockbusters, but which has a real aesthetic and shows Christopher's mastery to convey stories through the camera's angle. And this is what I advise you to study in his movies. We're going to take a look at his works made with the brilliant Wong Kar-wai. First, 2046, with its totally electric and crazy color palette and its slightly crazy story, but especially his previous work, In the Mood for Love, a movie that I love so much. Just the title in itself is already fantastic. I'm not going to lie to you, it's mainly for this movie that I wanted to talk about Doyle. In the Mood for Love is the kind of movie where you feel like you've watched an extremely simple, even simplistic story, but which in fact you can interpret it in a million different ways when you try to analyze it. We follow two protagonists, a man and a woman in the Hong Kong of the 60s, who will discover that their respective spouses have an affair together. And both of them will try to understand why, how it happened. The whole film is their analysis of these small details. The whole film is under the theme of voyeurism, and this is what the photography conveys. When you think photography, you think first of light, you think composition, you think color. The film shows that photography is also a point of view, and that this point of view is decisive for the narrative, that it is an element of the narrative. First, in the way the camera follows them from afar, from behind, at eye level. Then how the framing constantly encloses them, how Doyle plays with the different planes of the image, not necessarily to give depth, but more to give the feeling that they are being spied on discreetly through objects in the set, through the mirrors, through the frames, every little detail. We observe them as they observe what is happening to them. The aesthetics of this movie is a masterpiece, you really need to see it. John Alcott started in the cinema industry at the very bottom as a clapper. You know, it's the person who does the clapping. Well, he worked on a lot of films, and again, I'm sorry to put a whole part of his career aside like that, but I'm not going to lie to you if I talk about him. It's mostly to talk about one of my favorite directors, Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick himself worked a lot on the photography of his movies since he started his career as a photographer, so I could have directly talked about him, but Alcott had a huge influence on his work, and it started with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yes, I'm part of the team of those who worship this movie. Yes, I'm Team Kubrick anyway, as you can guess. But if you're on the I don't understand this movie or I don't like it, nothing happens team, it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away the fact that it's one of the greatest movies of all time and that you have to see it. Kubrick will give Alcott a chance, first to assist with the lighting, but when it is necessary to shoot the first part of the film, At the Dawn of Man, which was in fact shot at the end of the production, Alcott will find himself in charge of the photography. And it's his use of telephoto lenses to shoot wide shots that will impress Kubrick and make him realize the potential of the guy. Yeah, I know, monkeys touching a big stone, it gives me goosebumps.
Stop there.
So they're going to continue their collaboration on A Clockwork Orange, where the problem for the two of them was to determine how to stylize violence. To really stylize it ostensibly to the point of making it visually absurd. I know that there are many debates about these films and we will have to talk about it for hours. I'll let you have your own opinion, we are talking more about the technique here. First, the lighting, where they had to get as close as natural light as possible, but sometimes in tight spaces. The problem with artificial lights is their diffusion, so Alcott hung reflective umbrellas all over the ceilings to bounce the lights from the projectors, which allowed Kubrick to operate his camera as he wanted in space and not limit his movements, especially regarding the lenses chosen, often very wide angles. And as we saw before, at this time, filming landscape, okay, but filming people with these lenses, it was extremely complex because of the deformation. It was partly intentional, just for the style, as we mentioned, but it must not have to be extreme either. And that's where they started working with the French company Kinoptique, with the Tegea 9.8mm that give this special look to some particular scenes in the film. This won't be the last time the duo will have to go for special lenses. On Barry Lyndon, they decided that they would work entirely in natural light. How do you do that when you have to shoot scenes lit only with a few candles? And at the time you didn't have a A7S III that could go up to ISO 100,000. And I'll tell you right now, well, you don't. That's not something you can tell Kubrick.
If it can be written or thought, it can be filmed.
The guy won't let go, so he's going to knock on NASA's door. Yeah, NASA. Hey guys, you're making lenses to go into space, right? There is almost no light there. Well, go ahead, give me one. Hey, I helped you out when you had to shoot your film on the moon in a studio with the weird shadows and stuff. Conspiracy, they hide everything. So NASA is going to develop a 50mm 0.7 aperture. This thing must have cost a fortune I can't even imagine. In short, Kubrick and Alcott tinker a focal length converter to turn it into a 35mm, and it will help to create one of the most visually stunning movies, where every frame is a Gainsborough painting, a masterpiece of chiaroscuro, Barry Lyndon. Alcott will win the Oscar for Best Photography and leave his name in history for having participated in the creation of one of the most visually successful works in film history.
The winner is John Alcott for Barry Lyndon.
We could talk about The Shining, but I refuse to talk about this movie in just a few sentences. It will be an offense to it. So you'll just have to watch Shining again, just for fun. And analyzing the cinematography of this movie, it's... well, I say I wouldn't talk about it. You have to do it, you have to work a little bit too. Unfortunately, this is their last collaboration since Alcott will die of a heart attack at the end of the 80s. We will never know what he could have brought to Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut that I strongly advise you to analyze too, like all the Kubrick's movies. Actually, no. Basically, I was supposed to finish by telling you about Matthew Libatic and his incredible contributions to Darren Aronofsky's visual universe. Like Pi, Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan, The Fountain, Mother, or in other movies like the recent A Star is Born, but also a rather unknown film that I love, Phone Booth. When you manage to make a movie visually strong while it takes place entirely in a phone booth, you're pretty good. But in the end, no. I'm going to let you go and see these movies. We're going to talk about someone else, who is not a cinematographer, who doesn't do film in the sense that we just talk about, not live action. I know we're not going to be into their theme, but I said to myself, why care? I do what I want. What you gonna do? We're going to talk about a genius who is unfortunately not well known. Director, scriptwriter, storyboarder, that's the part we are interested in, animator and mangaka Satoshi Kon. I know it may seem strange to want to draw inspiration from animation, which can get away from the physical constraint we have in photography when we are forced to capture reality. But I come from the world of 3D and 2D animation, since I'm also a motion designer, where you learn how much work goes into composition, color harmonization, human characterization, how simple expressions can express emotions. All of that are skills that you can translate into photography. You could say that animation is free of the limitation that we have physically with light, but it's the opposite. We have to understand even more how light works to try to transcribe it in a realistic way. Even the way to express the feeling of movement, or for the video part, the movement itself and the transitions. I know it could sound ridiculous at first, but studying all Disney classics visually can make you a better photographer. Yeah, and Satoshi Kon is for me the biggest cinematic slap in the face on the one hand, but also visual slap in the face that I've had in the last few years. He's a forgotten genius of history, for me of a talent at least equal to Walt Disney, and I'm talking about him in the middle of cinematographers because he mostly creates all the universe of these films. By storyboarding them himself from A to Z, he has a very particular production method. Maybe you know his most commercially successful movie, Paprika, since Christopher Nolan confessed that he was more than inspired by it to make Inception, and that put Paprika in the spotlight. But for me, it's those less sci-fi works that I enjoy the most. Tokyo Godfathers, which is about 3 homeless people who find a baby in the trash on Christmas Eve. It's interesting to see how he illustrates the absurdity of escaping reality mixed with themes like social exclusion. But those two great masterpieces for me, if you can only watch two, are Perfect Blue and probably one of my favorite films of the last few years, Millennium Actress. These are the two movies that best deal with the overall theme of his entire work, subjective reality. The opposition between reality as it is, unchanging, and our inner subjective reality, which is often quite different. Perfect Blue tells the story of a young idol, this Japanese pop star, who will try to change her career path, which will not please one of her stalkers. The visual universe is simple at first, to become more complex little by little, and Satoshi will deploy a lot of tricks to make us oscillate between fiction, reality and illusion until we can no longer distinguish them. Millennium Actress tells the story of a director who wants to make a documentary about a former great actress who stopped her career years ago for no apparent reason. The imagery goes from present moments to memories of the past, from reality to the films she acted in, her memories, fantasized or real. This film is extraordinary. It is an epic story about love, not a love story but a story about love, love between people, but also a love story about the Japanese cinema of the 60s, about cinema in general, about the image in general. It's visually fantastic. There are so many other movies I want to tell you about. Actually, I should have just listed them for 20 minutes, you know, like, okay, watch this, watch this, watch this. I should have. Go and have a look at the description. I will already write down the ones we talk about today. I hope at least to make you discover one or two bangers. But the main thing to remember is that inspiration is not only found by scrolling on Instagram. Being a photographer is to educate your eye to understand what works visually in photography, but also in illustration, in movies, in painting, or the list of painters to know to be a better photographer. Good idea. I will put some more videos for you to watch here, and then the subscription, the like, the newsletter now. Yeah, you know what to do. See you, mate. Keep on creating.